7TV Fantasy is a tabletop skirmish wargame, inspired by fantasy films, books, and games. In 7TV Fantasy, two casts of stalwart heroes and evil minions face off against one another in action-packed adventures. These can span a range of locations and genres, from lonely wildernesses to claustrophobic forests, from the darkest dungeon to the tallest wizard's tower. Your imagination is the limit. 7TV Fantasy is the product of a second collaboration between creative writing students at Edge Hill University and Crooked Dice Game Design Studio, publishers of the 7TV series of cinematic skirmish games. In this How to Play video, we'll guide you through the action of one of many exciting ways to play the game, to help you learn the rules and see for yourself the variety and scope 7TV Fantasy has to offer. In a game of 7TV Fantasy, you and an opposing player are directing a chapter of a fantasy epic, complete with arcane spells, monstrous encounters, and epic swordplay. In 7TV, you control the cast, a mix of stars, co-stars, and extras. You can generate your own cast, inspired by a favourite fantasy setting, your own imagination, or by using a Crooked Dice cast as a starting point. Detailed instructions on how to create casts can be found in the 7TV Fantasy box set.
In this battle, a ragtag fellowship led by the Grand Magus and a weathered ranger stage a seemingly doomed defence of this small market town. Striking across the pastoral landscape is a vile necromancer and its goblin retinue. Both of these casts are 33 ratings. Ratings determine the size and strength of your cast and are used to balance the game. Each cast has also drawn artifact cards, mystical relics or treasures of renown that can be used in-game. In the battle, one player rolls a d6 to determine the amount of objective tokens in play. These tokens represent items of strategic value that our casts will attempt to seize. Claiming any of these objectives will grant a cast victory points at the end of the game, as will casualties inflicted on the enemy cast. Victory points will determine the victor at the end of the game. 7TV Fantasy is a turn-based wargame. At the start of the game, players will make an initiative roll, indicating a battle of wits. Each player rolls 1d6 and adds the highest mind statistic in their cast to the result.
In our game, the villainous cast scored higher and won the initiative roll, and therefore takes the first turn. They are now on screen. The player who loses the initiative roll immediately gains 2 plot points. Plot points are the main resource in 7TV. They are used by a player to activate models, enhance the maelstrom of combat, use special effects and powerful artifacts, and recover from debilitating statuses. Plot points carry over between turns.
Each turn is divided into 3 phases: the Trilogy Phase, the Action Phase, and the End Phase.
In the Trilogy Phase, the on-screen player, the player whose turn it is, draws a Trilogy card. Trilogy cards are an indicator of how many turns are left to play your chapter, and may provide help or hindrance during the current turn.
The Trilogy deck is comprised of 3 parts, mirroring the 3 acts of a narrative. Act 1 focuses on the thrill of the chase, and generally provides benefits and penalties to your cast's movement. Act 2 centres around combat, with fists, arrows, and dazzling spells flying back and forth. Act 3, the finale, represents the climactic closing moments of the epic.
The amount of Trilogy cards in a game is determined by the size of your playing area. Drawing the final Trilogy card signals the final turn of the game.
For their opening turn, the villainous cast draws the tragic backstory Trilogy card, hinting at a complicated history between our 2 stars. Both the Grand Magus and the vile necromancer are moved 6 inches towards one another. We resolve this immediately. Once the Trilogy card has been resolved, we place it in the discard pile and move into the Action Phase.
In the Action Phase, the on-screen player generates plot points for their cast. A star generates 2 plot points, a co-star generates 1 plot point, and any extras in a cast generates half a plot point each, rounding up.
The villainous cast contains 1 star and 9 extras, totaling 7 plot points.
Once plot points have been generated, models may then be activated for a single plot point cost. Once activated, a model may take 2 actions to either move, attack, or take a special action. Models may be activated in any order, but may only be activated once in a turn.
The villainous cast chooses to activate the Vile Necromancer first, spending the necessary plot point. Its first action is to move 6 inches ahead, leading their dark forces from the front. The model then uses its second action to move another 6 inches towards the objective token. All models move up to 6 inches, unless specified otherwise. Having moved twice, the Vile Necromancer completes its activation. Next, the villainous cast activates the Goblin Champion for another plot point. The Goblin Champion has the Rider special effect, which is brand new to 7TV Fantasy.
A profile with the Rider special effect may spend a special action to ride a profile with the Mount special effect when in base contact. The Goblin Champion uses its first action to make a special action to mount their wolf, and its second to move forward towards objective token 2. When a Rider model is mounted, it uses the Mount's movement, in this case 7 inches. A Mount's move distance will be listed in its special effects.
The Goblin Champion has taken 2 actions, and thus completes its activation. The Goblin Shaman is activated next, at the cost of a plot point. It uses its first action to move 6 inches up to the river's edge, and its second action to attempt to swim across. All models are able to swim, but movement through water is slow going. Each 1 inch moved actually costs 2 inches of movement, essentially halving the distance travelled in that move action. Therefore, the Goblin Shaman is only able to wade 3 inches across before their movement ends. Using a plot point, the villainous cast activates the Goblin King. With its first action, it expends a plot point to use the Unit Leader special effect.
Units and their members are listed in the back of the casting guide.
All members of the Goblin Raiding Party unit within 6 inches of their king are able to activate without incurring the usual plot point cost. With its second action, the Goblin King uses the War Drums special effect, providing a 3-inch movement bonus to Goblin models within 6 inches. This ends the Goblin King's activation. Now activating without incurring a plot point cost, this Goblin Sneak uses its first action to move, adding the 3-inch War Drums bonus for a whopping 9-inch move action. It then spends its second action moving the normal 6-inch distance. This ends its activation. The 3 Goblin Warriors also activate for free, as they too are in the Goblin Raiding Party unit. They spend both actions moving forward, eagerly charging headfirst into combat. They also gain the bonus 3-inch move to their first movement action from the Goblin King's War Drum special effect. Each model then makes a second move action of 6 inches.
The Heroic Cast's co-star, the Weathered Ranger, has the Tireless Tracker star quality. Some star qualities and special effects allow your models to act during your opponent's turn. For the cost of a plot point, the Weathered Ranger can choose to move directly towards an enemy model that moved this turn. Given the Goblin Warriors have just advanced, the Weathered Ranger follows suit.
With 2 plot points remaining, the villainous cast chooses to end their action phase. In the end phase, a cast always checks to see if they have been axed. The villainous cast has not had over half of their models removed from play, and thus does not need to test for axing. Next, they resolve any models that currently have the on fire status. None do, so the villainous cast ends their turn. It is now the heroic cast's turn to be on screen.
The Heroic Cast draws Midas Touch. As specified by the Trilogy card, both casts immediately gain 2 plot points.
The heroic cast generates plot points following the plot point generation rules. 2 for a star, 1 for a co-star, and half a plot point rounded up for extras. They gain 6 plot points, added to the 2 gained for going second and the other 2 gained from Midas Touch, totalling 10 plot points.
The heroic cast activates the Grand Magus for a plot point. Spying the Vile Necromancer closing on the objective token, the Grand Magus spends its first action moving directly towards the opposing star. It then uses its star quality, None Shall Pass. Using a star quality is a free action, which means it does not count towards the 2 actions a model may make in its activation. None Shall Pass places the barrier template provided in the 7TV Fantasy box in front of the model. Each enemy model that is touched is stunned, and any within 2 inches of the front are pushed back 2 inches. The Vile Necromancer is touched by the template and is therefore pushed back 2 inches and gains the stun status. Next to the model, we place the stunned token.
A stunned model is knocked down. In 7TV, we lay models down to represent this effect. Stunned models also cannot activate as long as the status applies to them. However, because the Vile Necromancer has the Undead special effect, it can never be stunned, so we remove the token and stand them back up.
Because the Grand Magus used 1 action to move and a free action to use their star quality, they still have 1 action left. To ensure that the Vile Necromancer cannot lay claim to the objective token, the Grand Magus chooses to use a presence attack.
Presence attacks are a new type of strike action introduced for 7TV Fantasy. They represent a battle of wits or a strength of wills. They work in the same way as other strike actions. The Grand Magus declares a presence strike against the Vile Necromancer.
When declaring a strike, the controlling player must choose an attack listed on the model's profile card. This might be a fight, shoot, or presence attack. The Grand Magus chooses Beetling Brows, a presence attack which has a range of 10 inches. Once a strike is declared, the controlling player must first see if the model can draw line of sight. If this is impossible, the strike fails. Then, the attacker must measure to see if the target is in range of the chosen attack.
There is no pre-measuring in 7TV. If the target exceeds the strike range, the strike automatically fails.
In this case, the Vile Necromancer is firmly within the Grand Magus' steely gaze. The next stage of the strike sequence is to have the defending model make a defense roll. This roll represents a combination of agility, size, mental fortitude, and natural toughness. A defense roll is 1d6 plus the model's defense statistic listed on the profile card. A model defending against a strike may choose to pay plot points to add extra dice. The only limit to the amount of extra dice that may be added are the plot points at the controlling player's disposal. Each extra die costs 1 plot point. All dice are rolled at the same time.
Not sensing much of a threat, the villainous cast chooses to forgo adding any extra dice to their defense roll. The Vile Necromancer rolls 1d6, rolling a 2. We then add the model's defense of 10 to this result, totaling a defense roll of 12. The Grand Magus must equal or exceed this roll in order for the strike to be successful.
The Grand Magus uses the strike number of the selected attack. Their Beetling Brows have a strike number of 9 and adds 1d6. Together, this result totals the strike value. As we can see, the Grand Magus only needs a 3 to equal the defense roll, so decides not to roll any extra dice. It rolls a 4, adding its strike value of 9, giving a total of 13. This result exceeds the Vile Necromancer's defense roll, and the strike is successful. The attack effect is then applied to the target of the strike. The Vile Necromancer gains the distracted status. Their undead nature doesn't protect them from this status, and so we place the distracted token next to the model.
There are 8 statuses in 7TV Fantasy, and each negatively impact a model's ability to move, fight, and/or defend itself.
The heroic cast spends a plot point to activate the knight. Its first action is to mount its warhorse. And its second action is to move the 7 inches specified on the warhorse profile card. The heroic cast then activates both halflings, moving each twice toward the centre of the playing area. Halflings have the special effect of Move X, which specifies how far they can move with each action. They have Move 4, so they travel a total of 8 inches this turn. The Elf Scout is activated next and spends both actions moving 6 inches for a total of 12 inches. The Heroic Cast finally activates the Dwarf Fighter and spends both actions moving. However, the Dwarf Fighter, like the Halflings, has a reduced move. This Dwarf Fighter moves 5 inches with each move action and is therefore steadily left behind by the faster elf. With 1 plot point left, the Heroic Cast ends their action phase. They have not lost half of their cast and no model is on fire, so their turn ends.
At the start of their second turn, the Villainous cast draws the Bardic Interlude Trilogy card. As specified by this Trilogy card, the player selects the Knight and places a distracted token next to the model. They then generate their plot points, adding 7 to their pool of 4. We then move into the action phase. The Villainous cast activates the Goblin Champion, who spends its first action to move into base contact with the objective token. However, the mounted rules specify that a rider on a mount may only make 1 action that turn, as the other is presumably spent wrangling the beast. That objective will have to wait until next turn. With that, the Goblin Champion's activation ends. Next, the Goblin King is activated. The model is currently further than 6 inches away from the group of Goblin Warriors, so the King must first move closer before being able to gain the benefit from their unit leader special effect. The Goblin King does this with its second action, and the activation ends.
Now activating for free, the Goblin Warriors move twice. With 1 moving into fight range with the Grand Magus. A model moving into fight range with an opposing model on their first move action is considered to have charged and generates a free strike. However, as this was the second move action, no free strike is generated.
Having spent both actions, all 3 Goblin Warriors end their activations.
The Heroic Cast's Weathered Ranger elects to spend another plot point to use their Tireless Tracker star quality and move another 6 inches towards the Goblin Warriors, eager to face them in battle.
This Goblin Sneak was further than 6 inches away from the Goblin King, and thus does not activate for free with Unit Leader. The Villainous cast pays the usual plot point to activate the model.
The Goblin Sneak profile has the Climb special effect, which allows the model to climb vertical surfaces as if they were a ladder. The Goblin Sneak moves twice, spending all 12 inches to climb vertically to the top of the hill, offering a great vantage point across the playing area. This ends the model's activation.
The other Goblin Sneak, which is yet to move this game, was within 6 inches of the Goblin King, and so activates for free and moves twice. Still wading across the river, the Goblin Shaman is activated and spends its first action to move to the other riverbank, remembering that movement in water is halved. With its second action, the Goblin Shaman uses its special effect, Bad Trips. Some special effects are so powerful that they require an additional plot point in order to use. The Villainous cast spends the plot point and must now pass a Spirit Statistic Test in order for the Goblin Shaman to use their Twisted Fungamancy.
Statistic tests challenge a model's brain, brawn, or strength of will. Compare the value of the relevant statistic against the table in the Director's Guide. In order to pass this spirit test, the Shaman must roll a 4 or above. The Villainous cast rolls a 5, a pass.
The Goblin Shaman chooses a shortcut too, selecting a point 12 inches away, just next to the Knight and Warhorse, pushing them 2 inches away, sending them into the river. Now, it is the Knight and the Steed which must pass body statistic tests. The Knight's body statistic is 4, therefore requiring a 4 or above. The Heroic cast rolls a 3, failing, and so the Knight suffers the ill effects of the special effect, gaining the poison status. The Warhorse must roll separately. It rolls a 4 and passes. To conclude their action phase, the Villainous cast wishes to activate the Vile Necromancer. However, it is still suffering from the distracted status.
Statuses may be removed before or after a model activates for the cost of a plot point. In this case, the villainous cast elects not to remove the status before activating. This may have negative effects on the model's performance, but is cheaper than paying to remove the status.
Desiring to claim the objective token, the Vile Necromancer hatches a plan. It spends a special action to use one of its artifacts, Magic Compass, which allows a player to move a token 8 inches in any direction. The villainous player chooses to move it into base contact with the Vile Necromancer, who may now claim it as a free action, as specified by the artifact.
When a star or co-star claims an objective token, the controlling cast gains 2 additional plot points.
With 1 action left, the Necromancer attempts its own presence attack against the Grand Magus, declaring a Death Rattle Presence strike. The strike is in range and line of sight, but first the Vile Necromancer must pass a Spirit Statistic Test, as determined by the Grand Magus' fearsome special effect. The Vile Necromancer rolls a 4, passing, and so may continue unimpeded. The Grand Magus rolls 1d6, rolling a 5, adding their defense statistic, totaling 15. The Vile Necromancer then rolls a 5, adding the strike value of 9, totaling 14. This does not equal or exceed the defense roll, and thus fails. This ends the Necromancer's activation and the villainous cast's action phase. With no models removed from play, and no models on fire, the villainous cast ends their turn.